are well-versed in their nutrition, exercise, building reserves for peak performance, and endurance and stress management. Dr. Bendheim is joining us from Phoenix, Arizona. He has a passion to reduce the risk of Alzheimer's disease through evidence-based lifestyle practices. He is the founder of BrainSavers. He is a board-certified neurologist and an authority on Alzheimer's disease and all dementias. He has lectured around the world and published a book, The Brain Training Revolution, a proven workout for the health brain aging. Please welcome my friend, Dr. Paul Bendheim.
Am I audible, Linda? And
there you are, we see you.
Great, okay. So I'm gonna hit the share screen button and let's see if I can do this. I know something about biotechnology, but this electronic technology is a challenge at times. How does that, do you see my screen?
We do.
Great, well, let me thank all of you, especially.
You want to start your presentation from the beginning.
Yes, it should be right here. Let me see if I can, do you see the main slide, the first slide?
We see the whole presentation on the left, so start from the beginning.
There you go.
There you go, you're in business.
Good. So let me first of all thank Linda, Andy Kazmierzak, who discovered BrainSavers on behalf of Lutheran Home, and of course the Olympic Committee, I think, and Susan for inviting me to do this. It's an honor. I happen to enjoy visiting Chicago and your great museums and architecture. I've tried to pack a lot into this 45-minute talk and still leave time for questions. So I'm going to go fast. The brain is the most complex thing in the universe. So to try and cover it and do some justice in 45 minutes is a task, but I have a passion for this, as Linda mentioned, and so here we go. So as Linda mentioned, I'm a professor of neurology at the College of Medicine, University of Arizona in Phoenix. I went to the College of Medicine in Tucson, the first medical school in Arizona, and I founded BrainSavers. And today I'd like to give at least a 10,000-foot view of the spectrum of age-associated cognitive decline and spend a few minutes with some specifics about Alzheimer's disease. And then I want to talk about the new science of the aging brain, these remarkable discoveries over the last quarter of a century that enabled me and the team at BrainSavers to develop our pioneering program. And I'll mention the basic and clinical science research that have really revolutionized our understanding of the aging brain. And then I'll spend some time on the lifestyle components, 6 of them, each of which that has independent evidence to document how they impact positive, healthy brain aging. And at the end, I'll describe, or during the course of the presentation, I'll describe evidence-based programming to engage what I refer to as the worried well, the 100 million plus Americans who are over the age of 60 or 50, including boomers, who constitute the worried well, people that are aware of the possibility of cognitive decline and want to be proactive. So I don't need to say this to all of you. You're all familiar with the perils of an impaired older brain. And our goal is obviously to keep each of our brains and the brains of our loved ones and those we care for as healthy as possible and reduce the risk of arguably the worst disease that can affect an aging individual, and that's Alzheimer's disease. Interestingly, the brain is the only organ that demonstrably improves in function with age. Now, I don't deny that there's age-related wear and tear. We're not as quick in processing new information, but in fact, the older brain is better at making decisions. It's more emotionally stable. It's more creative, and it's more knowledgeable. And we see that across every profession. Our judges, our lawyers, our doctors, our educators, our business people, as they age and stay healthy, they're better at their work. I might even throw in, and your congresswoman, who I heard earlier, fits this. Even some politicians seem to get better with age. So there's two fundamental principles underlying what I refer to as the new science of the aging brain. And let me tell you a quick story. When I was a medical student, I was privileged to spend 3 months in New York City at Columbia. And the Neurological Institute there is world-renowned. And Houston Merritt, who had retired by the time I got there as chairman, still came in once a week to meet with the students. And he said something one day that so impacted me. It's in my book, and I'll never forget it. He said, the worst thing about growing old is sitting in my chair and listening to my brain cells commit suicide. That was the central dogma of the aging brain when I was a student and a resident. Houston Merritt, as great as he was, and his textbook is, I think, in its 15th or 16th edition, he was wrong. We now know that an older brain, even an 80-year-old brain, can generate new cells. Neurogenesis is the term we use, and it can connect those cells with new synaptic connections. A synapse is a connection between two brain cells, and a healthy brain cell will have up to 10,000 synapses with other cells. So that's the principle of neuroplasticity. Your brain can change its shape. The other major principle is brain reserve or cognitive reserve. Everyone knows what physical reserve is. Olympic athletes and anybody who does some physical activity decreases their risk of heart disease, stroke, depression, some cancers. Well, cognitive or brain reserve is the equivalent for the central nervous system. So a little bit of anatomy, and you see the purple seahorse in the middle. That's the most critical structure when it comes to memory. That's the hippocampus. Hippocampus, translated from the Greek, means seahorse. And without it, you can't form memories. We only learned that about 70 years ago when Robert Scoville, a surgeon, Harvard-trained surgeon, operated on a young man in Connecticut who for years was known in the literature only as HM. When he died in 2006, we learned his full name. Anyway, this young man had a bicycle accident as a child, had a head injury, and developed epilepsy. And this was before the era of, now we have several dozens of potent anticonvulsant drugs. Anyway, Henry was operated on, and a good part of his hippocampus was removed bilaterally, both the left and right side of the brain. And sure enough, Henry woke up with dramatically decreased seizure frequency, but he could never form another memory. And that's when we learned of the critical importance of the hippocampus in memory formation. And in fact, it's the first structure usually to be affected by Alzheimer's disease. And that explains the short-term memory complaints of patients, more likely their spouse or family members or caregivers, saying, John keeps asking me what he had for breakfast, and he just finished his breakfast an hour before he's repeating this question many times. The hippocampus is damaged, memories cannot be formed. So again, we're talking about the most incredible thing in the universe. Each of us has approximately 100 billion neurons, brain cells, connected by approximately 100 trillion connections, synapses. I was taught there were 1 trillion glial cells. Those are the supportive housekeeping cells. The more recent studies estimate that there are only 100 billion. Still, it's a lot. And these neurons are connected by many cables, axons and dendrites. You have 2.5 miles of these cables packed into your skull and spinal cord. During pregnancy, the brain grows at the rate of 250,000 nerve cells per minute, new cells per minute. And we're still a long way from understanding functions and specificity. And one of the intriguing questions is, how is such an intricate network constructed in the first place? It is quite mind-boggling. Now, I have to show this slide because of my interest in art and art history and the history of neuroscience. The illustrations on the left were done with a microscope less sophisticated than a high school student in Chicago uses nowadays. They were done by Ramon y Cajal, who was the one using his microscope, was the one who determined that in fact the brain is not one mass of interconnected cells and wires, but consists of these 100 billion discrete neurons that don't touch each other, but are connected by these synapses, which have molecular size gaps between them, which neurotransmitters. And on the right, just to show you how accurate he was, this is a photomicrograph using the sophisticated staining techniques we have now, showing neurons and synaptic densities. And what Cajal said when he got the Nobel Prize, that the brain is a number of unexplored continents, still applies, but we know several orders of magnitude now. And the exciting thing for me personally, and hopefully for all of you involved in care and providing services for patients with cognitive impairment, is what lifestyle can do. So quickly, abnormal brain aging. So age-associated memory impairment is normal. So forgetting where you left your purse, or like yesterday, I couldn't find my cell phone. When that happens once in a while, it's not a sign of impending disaster. In fact, students forget things. I'm sure all of you can recall instances where you studied, go into an exam, and you can't remember the answer to something you knew the night before. Now, when cognitive issues get to the point that they interfere with daily activities, that's when we as neurologists and all of you as caregivers, or have a family member with things like that, need to be worried. And the first stage of significant cognitive impairment we call mild cognitive impairment. And about 15% of people with MCI will progress to dementia every year. Now, dementia is a non-specific term. It's not a disease, it's a group of symptoms. And I've listed some, I'm not going to read them. I think all of you know that. The important thing is in red at the bottom. Many diseases and conditions can produce dementia. Some of these are reversible. That is the absolute necessity of every physician who investigates patients with symptoms of cognitive decline, is to look for a treatable, reversible cause. So none of the ones at the top here are treatable or reversible now, even though, as was mentioned by your congresswoman, Biogen has submitted a drug. I don't want to throw cold water on it, but it's an uphill battle given the results of the actual clinical trials with that drug. And then there are a group of diseases. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease is popularly known as mad cow disease. The first 10 years of my career were spent studying that disease. Now, this is the important list: treatable, reversible dementias. And I won't go through the list. Any competent internist, family practitioner, certainly a neurologist, knows now, because of the attention that's been given to Alzheimer's disease because of the epidemic, to look for these. And what's not listed here is depression. Depression can mimic Alzheimer's disease. It's not a dementia, but it can produce all the symptoms of dementia. And here, just to summarize from the Alzheimer's Society of Canada, if you yourself are worried about your memory, you're in pretty good shape. It's when you don't worry about it and family members, friends notice problems, that's when we're not talking about normal aging. We're talking about a cognitive issue that needs investigation. And again, in red, if it impairs daily activities, it's no longer normal aging. It's cognitive decline that needs a thorough investigation. So I don't need to tell this audience that globally we're aging. And it's only been in the last couple of years that the number of people over 65 have surpassed children under the age of 5 in total numbers. And you can see by 2050, about 17% of the population will be over 65. And we'll see.
If I could stop you there. We have one quick question. So are you saying vascular dementia is not reversible?
Yeah, so vascular dementia refers to classically multiple small strokes. It's to some degree preventable. That's why cardiovascular health is so important. But once you have enough damage from vascular insults, either hemorrhagic or ischemic stroke, you have tissue damage that's, with current science, not reversible. Often we see mixed dementia, Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. Okay.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So top concern about getting older is obviously maintaining cognitive capacity. Now, we're in an epidemic of Alzheimer's disease at the early stages of it. And you can't pick up the newspaper, go on the internet or TV, listen to the radio, not hear about this disease. I don't need to tell this audience that the target of Alzheimer's is the brain, and you see the hippocampus there, the memory maker of your brain. And I need to acknowledge Rebecca Durham, who did these illustrations for my book. And you can't see me, you can see my face, I guess. Well, I was 6 feet 4 inches tall before I wrote this book. Now I'm 5'6". So any of you thinking about taking on a task like that, call me. No, actually it was very rewarding and very educational. So here's what an Alzheimer's brain looks like on the left compared to a normal brain on the right. And you see in the top panels, the so-called Alzheimer's plaques. Those are the beta amyloid plaques. And all of us have a few of those as we age, just like we all get some changes in our skin, sunspots and whatnot. But an Alzheimer's brain is chock full of those amyloid plaques. And even though more than 100 trials have failed trying to stop the accumulation or clear the accumulated amyloid out of the brain, they've all failed, but I think many of us still believe at the end of the day, that's the prime target. And we also have a second abnormality microscopically, and those are the so-called tau neurofibrillary tangles, and you see those on the lower left. But grossly, you see a normal 75, 80-year-old brain on the right, how full it is, whereas the one on the left is atrophied, it's shrunken. Now, how big a problem is this? It's currently the 5th leading cause of death. Here it says 6. 1 in 3 seniors will die with Alzheimer's disease or another dementia. As we speak today, there's a new case diagnosed almost every minute, and Alzheimer's deaths are up almost 150% in the last 20 years, whereas heart disease deaths are down about 9 or 10%. And 2 great risk factors: unhealthy lifestyle practices and advancing age. We can't do anything about our age, but we can do something about lifestyle. So here are a few more statistics, and just to point out the financial cost of this disease. There are reputable medical economists who say that if we don't find a way to slow this tsunami that predicts 14, 15 million Americans with this disease by 2050, this one disease could bankrupt our healthcare system. And what's not shown here are the emotional costs. Fully 2/3 of caregivers, according to the National Alzheimer's Association, become clinically depressed. This is not a pleasant disease to care for. I have this vast professional experience. I have a personal experience. Both my father and his sister died of this disease. So, and I don't need to tell you, a lot of you are caregivers, how tough this is. So here again, unmodifiable is being older than 65. When you're 60, you have a 1% chance of getting this disease. That risk more or less doubles every 5 years. So the population over 80, depending on which epidemiological study we look at, between 30 and 50% will have Alzheimer's or another dementia, of which Alzheimer's is by far and away the most common. What is modifiable are unhealthy lifestyle practices and being socially isolated, which is a particular issue during the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is from the World Health Organization. 1/3 of dementia cases can be attributable to modifiable risk factors. So there's a lot of positive work to be done to impact this disease before we get classic medical or biological prevention strategies like vaccines. And unfortunately, we're still a long way away. Now, I don't intend for you to read this. You'll get the slides later. But on the left lists some of the major trials that have failed. I made this slide last year, and this is from the Alzheimer's Association, the bottom, that by one count, more than 190 drugs have failed in trials at a cost of tens of billions of dollars. And on the right are quotes from Scientific American, The Lancet, about the positive findings regarding what lifestyle can do. So what are strategies to promote successful aging? And I got to thank my colleague at the University of Pittsburgh, Chelsea Stillman, who put together this slide. And you can see the 6 interventions here: socialization, nutrition, cognitive thinking, sleep, stress reduction, and physical exercise. So to give you a bit of history, personal history, 16 years ago, I was reviewing a grant as a member of a scientific advisory board for a philanthropy in New York that supports research in Alzheimer's disease. And that grant opened my eyes to literature that I had not been following closely. As I said, Houston Merritt said there's no hope for your brain, basically. And you know, that central dogma, when you turned 40, your brain started to unravel. If you were lucky, it unraveled slowly and you lived to a ripe old age, mentally intact. If you were unlucky, it unraveled more quickly and you became senile, or now we say you become demented. Well, the grant I was reviewing had to do with the benefits of physical exercise on the aging brain. And a light bulb went off in my head. I said, I'm going to start senior centers with the emphasis on the brain. And fortunately, some smart people said, Paul, no one's going to give you money to buy real estate in Arizona, Florida, or Southern California, wherever you want to put these places. So develop a program and provide it to existing channels. So the first step, a friend of mine said, write a book. So that's this book. And I had to argue, oh, and you folks know this, Source Books, they're in your neighborhood. They're the publisher. And I had to argue with Shana Drays to get that seahorse on the cover, but it worked. People say, what's that doing on there? And then we developed this program, which we call the Brain+Body Total Fitness Program. And it has 6 components. Linda, how am I doing for time?
You got about 20 minutes left. We've finished.
Okay, I'm speed PowerPointing. And then, you know, the live program, the one that was on this slide, was born as a live instructor-led class, but we knew to really scale this and be able to provide it to the literally millions of people who could benefit, we had to make a digital version. And that's what we're calling BrainSavers SYNAPSE, staying connected. And I have to take my hat off again to Linda, Andy Kazmierzak at Lutheran Home to be the first adapters of BrainSavers SYNAPSE. And they have a great instructor, Kasia Lipinska, who we trained and certified. And Linda can speak offline to any of you who are interested about their experiences so far. So what's the program consist of? You saw the 6 components. It's organized, instructor-led. It includes brain exercises to strengthen memory and other cognitive processes. It includes physical exercise with the emphasis on aerobics, because that's undoubtedly the most powerful catalyst to promote new brain cells in the hippocampus and other places. Social activities, diet, stress, and sleep education. And importantly, because meeting 2 or even 3 times a week for an hour is not enough. Just like you can't walk 30 minutes 5 times a week in a 2-hour class. So the World Brain Gym is the concept we came up with. In Chicago, whatever suburb you're in, there's a plethora of World Brain Gym activities that are socially engaging, that incorporate cognitive and physical exercise, and that's an important part of the program. So here is the actual structure. There's a relaxation at the beginning. and then what we call thinking and moving activities, formerly cognitive movement activities. Dance is the best example. To learn a new dance, you have to be using your brain and using your body. And then there's the formal physical exercise component. And then there's what we call the deep dive, 15 minutes in one of the 6 components, whether it's nutrition or stress, memory formation. And then there's about 10 minutes of formal cognitive exercises led by Dr. Gina Touch Mercer, a colleague of mine at the medical school, who's our VP of Cognitive Sciences. And then finally, a couple minutes again of relaxation. So I borrowed this slide from Carol Zerniel, the past chairperson of the National Council on Aging, now the executive director of the WellMed Charitable Foundation. And for all of you who are making decisions as to programs to bring into your facilities, make sure they're evidence-based, and this is her criteria. So just a reminder, changing the shape of your brain, building brain reserve, those are the critical activities. So how do we do that? Here are the 6 components. I'm going to give you a couple minutes on each. Let's start with socialization. Researchers define socialization or social engagement as the maintenance of many social connections. They can quantify how many times you interact with other people and what activities you participate in and for how long. BrainSavers, we describe this as doing fun and engaging, mentally stimulating activities with family and friends. So the one thing I'd exclude from that in our current situation is talking politics. Try and keep that out of the conversation. Now, these are quotes from the literature, and this literature is now 10 years old. The study of staying socially engaged provides evidence that social integration delays memory loss among elderly Americans, and it's actually possible to reset the trajectory of cognitive decline by getting and staying involved. And the references are there, and there's many more papers since these 2 pioneering papers were published. What about mental and cognitive activities? These are harder to quantify, but it goes back to Cicero 2,000 years ago, who said we have to give greater care to our mind and soul than we do to our body, because it's intellectual activity that gives buoyancy to the mind. And then Darwin, what is that, 150 years ago, I love this one because he uses the word atrophy. You know, he was a scientist, but he said if he had read some poetry and listened to some music, perhaps those parts of his brain that had been atrophied, shrunk, could have been kept active through use. And he's right, use it or lose it. And in 2003, Professor Coyle, neurologist at Harvard, wrote this editorial because the evidence was starting to accumulate. And he asked that question, do effortful mental activities protect against dementia? And then 2 years later, scientists in Australia published this huge review. And their conclusion is there's robust evidence that complex patterns of mental activity, even starting in mid and late life, can reduce your risk of dementia. And obviously, the earlier you start, the better. So again, here's a list of workouts in the World Brain Gym. I like planning a trip to Italy. We can all plan, we can't go right now, but you spend a couple days really planning a detailed trip, what you're going to see in Rome and in Florence and Milan, where the Last Supper is. And then you treat yourself, takeout now, to a nice Italian meal if there's no religious or medical reasons not to drink, to have a glass or 2 of red wine. So what about physical activity? Are people that exercise at the age of 60, 70, 80, are they smarter? There's been a debate about this. Cicero, again, said that exercise supports the mind, keeps it in vigor. Well, our great American hero, Mark Twain, he said, there he is with his cigar. His only exercise is carrying the coffins of his friends who exercise regularly. Well, who's right? Unfortunately, this is the status of too many Americans as far as exercise. We have fit canines and unfit fellow citizens. And again, I want to show you the hippocampus here, the seahorse. It's highly sensitive to environmental enrichment. as I mentioned, it's the first region to generally show deterioration in Alzheimer's. And in animals, and I'll show you in humans, it supports, given the right ingredients, the right programming, new brain cells, and it's central to memory formation. So this is a classic study published 14 years ago out of the University of Illinois, Art Kramer's group, showing that seniors who exercised for 6 months had larger brain volumes than their peers who didn't, and they were measured by MRI at baseline at 6 months. Conclusion, cardiovascular fitness is associated with sparing of brain tissue in aging humans. And then a group from Colombia showed that you can actually see enlargement of the hippocampus if you do physical exercise and keep the hippocampus engaged by then doing cognitive work. If you simply grow new cells and don't use them, they're going to atrophy and go away. And this is work by Kirk Erickson and Chelsea Stillman at the University of Pittsburgh. And just look at the top, you can see physical exercise grows the hippocampus. And then in a meta-analysis, all those are independent studies. If you look at them all combined, physical activity reduces your risk for cognitive impairment. And on the next slide, physical activity specifically reduces your risk for Alzheimer's disease. So I realize I'm throwing a lot out there, but I want to paint a picture for all of you that there's real hope in the evidence-based literature that we can do something about cognitive decline with aging and specifically about Alzheimer's disease. So we have to vote remotely, but I'm sure this audience would vote overwhelmingly for our advocate for physical exercise on the left and let Mark Twain smoke his cigar in private. So what about nutrition? So does it matter to your brain what you give it? The brain is unique. It needs 2 forms of nutrition. It needs sensory stimulus. Without hearing, seeing, touch, tasting, feeling, your brain doesn't get the sensory experiences it needs to create thinking. But like every other organ, it needs nutrition in the classic sense. So now over the last 15, 20 years, there's been a plethora of studies documenting. Some of the best studies come right from your neighborhood, from Rush and the University of Illinois and the University of Chicago, really led by Rush, that the Mediterranean diet and its variations is neuroprotective and neurostimulating. So here are results from the literature. Adherence to the Mediterranean diet is associated with lower Alzheimer's disease risk. If you really stick to the Mediterranean diet, you reduce your risk by 40%. Even modest adherence reduces it by 20%. Now, 40%, if we could come up with a drug as a group that reduced the risk of Alzheimer's disease by 40%, we'd literally all be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. That's how big a problem this is. And that's how significant even a 20% risk reduction is when you look at societal numbers. So let's go to stress. We've known, and we all know, that stress is not good. Our brains evolved over millions of years to handle short-term acute stresses. So if the fire alarm went off or the smoke alarm in your house, you'd get up, you'd get out, and in a moment, you'd be safe. What our brains have not evolved to handle are the chronic, drawn-out stressors that the previous speakers addressed in one aspect regarding powers of attorney and so forth. And the long chronic stresses of substance or alcohol abuse, of ugly, long drawn out divorces, of losing one's house because of an inability to pay a mortgage, all of those are chronic stressors that are bad for the brain, and they actually shrink the hippocampus. Depression is the best studied chronic stress, and we know that depression impairs memory formation, reduces the volume of the hippocampus, but with treatment of depression, the hippocampus can recover as well as the memory formation. And I don't need to tell the audience about, this was in the University of Arizona online news bulletin just yesterday, about the next pandemic, and that is the increased incidence of psychological issues related to the pandemic and social isolation. So let's talk about sleep. When I was a resident, I knew sleep was important because I wasn't getting enough of it. I didn't know why. Now we know a tremendous amount. And Shakespeare beautifully captured what goes on in your brain when you're sleeping. And there's the sonnet on the right. I'll let you all read it. But the most interesting thing to me personally is your hippocampus is active while you're sleeping. It's acting as a movie director, reviewing the day's film and the previous day's films and getting rid of the frames that are not worth keeping and storing as permanent memories those frames that are important. And there are now many studies demonstrating this. You can train a group of people in a new task so that they're all performing at the same level at the end of the day's training. Half the group you don't let sleep, and the other half you let sleep normally. And the group that has slept will perform as well or even sometimes better than they did at the end of training. And you've heard of eureka moments. People have been struggling with issues, problems, and wake up with a solution. Your brain is active. You need to sleep 6, 7, 8 hours, depending on individual needs, every night to wake up restored, ready to go out the next day, and keep those memories permanent. So brain healthy lifestyle is now everywhere. I just will mention the finger study. This was done in Finland. It was published in 2015. I should go back, sorry. Can I do that? So it was a 2-year study. They took 1,200 aging at-risk Scandinavians, divided them into 2 groups. 600 got a multimodal program. You can see the interventions there. The other control group just got general health advice, and they looked at cognitive performance at the end of 2 years. And it made the cover of Scientific American. That's how significant this is. And Scientific American said a gold standard trial provides evidence that diet, and an active social life and exercise can prevent cognitive decline. Now, what they haven't shown, and it's important to point this out, but the group is being followed for a total of 7 years, does this improvement compared to the placebo arm, I'll call it that, translate into a reduced incidence of Alzheimer's? Many of us believe it will, but the proof is in the pudding. So this was a table illustration from that Lancet paper. At the top, you see risk factors for dementia. At the bottom, you see the protective factors. And now, even Harvard has published its guide to cognitive fitness, and it incorporates the same 6 components that BrainSavers pioneered more than a decade ago. Here it is. Each of us has to be our own healthy brain doctor. We each have to take responsibility for our brain. Like my wife says, I talk too much about this. I can talk till I'm blue in the face, but everybody needs to do everything they can to build brain reserve, take advantage of neuroplasticity, and keep that most valuable organ healthy. The National Alzheimer's Association says if we make brain healthy lifestyle changes, we could realize a future without Alzheimer's disease. I think that's a little over the top, but it serves the purpose. So the last 25 years has taught that your brain can be made bigger and stronger no matter what your age. Plasticity, changing its shape and building reserve are proven. The loss of synapses and neurons, what Dr. Merritt warned us about, is not a one-way street. And the risk of Alzheimer's disease and stroke-related dementia can be reduced by lifestyle choices. So let me thank Susan and the committee at the Memory Care Coalition for asking me to do this. And I want to again call out Linda and Andy at Lutheran Home for giving BrainSavers a chance in Illinois. And I think here, if you have questions, just email me or my colleague, Craig Ullman, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. And are there any more questions?
There are, Dr. Paul. Here's one for you. Would gardening, knitting, and jigsaw puzzling be of value as a preventative measure?
Can you see my thumbs?
Yes.
I'm an active gardener. We have 4 or 5 varieties of squash sitting on the counter. that we harvested yesterday, and tomatoes. So absolutely, gardening is a wonderful activity. You have to think, plan, and then you have to move. I would just caution everybody to be careful with their back. Try and use your knees rather than your low back to get down. And knitting, absolutely. Even though I don't knit, think about it. Fine motor coordination and planning the design. And what was the third one?
Crossword puzzles.
Yes, but my wife is, I can't say addicted. She does Sudoku. We all know plenty of people that do crossword puzzles. Any mental activity is beneficial, but you need to have a variety of them. You have 20 brain muscles up here. They all have to be exercised. Probably if you want to pick one thing, and I've actually asked this of some esteemed cognitive psychologists, if you had to pick one thing, just like walking is the one thing, if you're ambulatory for physical exercise, there's many others. Walking applies to most people in society. The one thing that would really work your brain is learning a new language. And that's tough, but what you want to do is you want to work up a few beads of brain sweat. But again, just like an apple a day doesn't keep the doctor away, a crossword puzzle a day doesn't keep dementia away, but it's part of a brain healthy lifestyle.
Perfect. Here's another question. What ethnic or racial socioeconomic demographic was the intervention tested on, and has it been adapted to groups that are not English speaking?
So you mean a BrainSavers type program? Where has it not been implemented?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, well, this is still relatively new. So I would say there's many, and I think we all know in this country, lower socioeconomic classes and Hispanic and Black communities generally have less access to health care and to health prevention strategies. We have a vast educational challenge here, specifically in brain health. I know neurologists who don't know about what I've spoken about today. In fact, it was only 4 or 5 years ago that I became courageous enough to speak about this in academic circles, because as I mentioned, the dogma was that this is voodoo. Now it's come to be prime time.
Okay. Any relationship with oral health and brain health?
Well, I know there's been literature about dental health and oral health, dental health and brain health. So there is literature. I don't think it's been proven. Clearly, though, if you have any chronic condition and it causes pain and discomfort, that's going to impact your cognitive ability. Think about our own personal experiences. If you're unhappy about something, you're not going to be as sharp mentally. If you have a physical ailment, you're in pain because of arthritis or whatever, your brain is impacted by that. So it's important to have good dental health. I don't think there's enough literature to say specifically that it impacts chronic brain health. We do know people with visual impairment and auditory impairment, those are risk factors for cognitive impairment. So as we age, and those of you who are caregivers, you have to make sure that those people that you're caring for, their vision and their hearing is kept maximal as possible.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. Where in the US is your brain training revolution given?
Well, in Arlington Heights, we're now in the process of expanding the reach of SYNAPSE, and I would predict that within a couple of months, individuals will be able to access it online. All of this, as I think many of you are aware, was precipitated by COVID. Prior to that, the live classes were in Arizona, Texas, Missouri, and about to start in Illinois when COVID put up the stop sign. So stay tuned. I'm an honest, transparent guy. I'm a doctor. I don't know business, but fortunately, in the last year, I've been able to put together a team of people that know how to scale this and get it out to hopefully across this country and even internationally. I'm very proud of the development team. I mentioned Dr. Touch, the cognitive psychologist. Angie Moore is our programs manager, and Linda has spoken with her. Scott Hansberry and Patrick Spear head up the business team with Craig and Jackie Hine, and the latest member, Ben Smith, who's a very seasoned entrepreneur. So anyway, it's exciting because, we have a chance to really do some good in the world, and that's very gratifying. And, it's been a long road. I mean, I started this 16 years ago.
I've got a couple more questions here. Do some of the medications out there help with people who are losing their memory, or is it just a gimmick?
No. So there are FDA-approved medications. I think most of the audience will know of Aricept and Exelon and Namenda. They help some people with dementia. I think the consensus is the mechanism of action. It makes people more alert. When you're more alert, you're more cognitively intact. Unfortunately, they don't work for everybody. They don't continue to work for people that they do work for initially, and they don't change the eventual course of the disease. In a degenerative disease like Alzheimer's disease, we talk about symptomatic treatment, and we talk about treatments that change disease progression, meaning instead of getting to a much worse stage in 5 years, maybe it's extended to 10 years. That's significant. We don't have those sorts of treatments in Alzheimer's. We do have them in multiple sclerosis now, so-called disease-modifying treatments.
All right, last question. What do you think of MRIs to detect Alzheimer's disease?
So if somebody has cognitive impairment, an image of the brain, either an MRI or a CT scan, is absolutely necessary. Why? Not so much that it can tell you the volume of the brain, the size of the hippocampus, but to look for things that could be treated or reversible. I've seen patients with chronic low-grade tumors or subdural hematomas, collections of blood between the brain and the interior part of the skull that puts pressure on the brain, and they look like they're demented. You remove the tumor, depending on where it is, or those chronic blood collections, and you've cleared to a large extent the cognitive impairment. So that's the key reason. That has to be absolutely part of an evaluation, an MRI scan or a CT scan.
Very good. Well, thank you, Dr. Bendheim, for an outstanding performance today. We certainly appreciate your participation in the Olympics, and especially from joining us from Arizona.
Yeah, well, I'll leave you with I don't know what the temperature is, but this morning when I went for my jog at about 5:30, it was already 88 degrees, and it's probably going to be 108 later. But as we say out here, it's a dry heat.
Right, right. A copy of Dr. Bendheim's presentation and link to the recording will be made available on the chicagomemory.org website a few days after the event. Also on the website is a link to complete an online evaluation, and we welcome your feedback from all leaders, and especially those needing CEUs. We will now take a 15-minute intermission, so grab some coffee, grab a snack, watch our commercials from the sponsors, enjoy their information, and we'll see you back here